So, as you often hear me say, the Dharma is everywhere in our lives. It's just, once you begin to see the world through the teachings of the Buddha, it's just everywhere. And today I want to, and I often get really inspired from just things I hear, I see, to talk about. And today I want to take another look at impermanence, but from a sort of different vantage point. And it comes from the lyrics of a song of one of my favorite groups, a band called Dawes. Some of you may or may not heard of them. They're a California band. They're not really well known, but they are led by a brilliant lyricist, a fellow named Taylor Goldsmith. And I love his lyrics because they line up so well with the Dharma. If he's not if he's not a student of the Buddha, he could sure pass for one. But anyway, the song that I want to quote from this morning is called "When My Time Comes," and the line is, quote, "The only piece of advice that continues to help is anyone that's making anything new only breaks something else. The only piece of advice that continues to help is anyone that's making anything new only breaks something else." So obviously this is going to be a discussion of impermanence from that perspective. And I was listening to them again last week, and that lyric always jumps out of me. And and I was walking my dogs, and I just started to think, well, I think I'm going to talk about that because it's always been a lyric that resonates. And I think it's really an honest statement about one aspect of our lives that we don't usually talk about, and we don't usually talk about making or changing uh, from this vantage point. And it's we like to believe that when we build something, a marriage, a friendship, a spiritual practice, a second act in life, a new self, we're just simply adding on to what's there. We're stacking things on top of it. Life gets fuller. Things, whatever they are, that underneath last forever. The shelf gets longer. The shelf gets taller. Progress with a capital P. But it isn't like that. It isn't like that from the inside. When I left uh, Christianity of my upbringing, I didn't experience it as adding a Buddhist practice. Something broke. Something had to. The two things could not coexist. I couldn't just stack one on top of the other. The old container could not hold what I was trying to pour into it. There was something there that wouldn't allow me to pour the new thing into it. And for a long time, actually longer than I care to admit, I walked around with pieces of the old thing in one hand and this sort of unformed, nebulous shape of the new thing in the other. And it was not a peaceful existence. In technical clinical terms, I was a mess. Um, you know, but then I come upon, as I dig further into it, this brilliant young man 2,600 years ago had a word for the part of me that was suffering that in between, upananda, which usually translates as grasping and clinging. I couldn't really let go of the old, so I was not able to fully incorporate the new. The hand would not open fully. I was clinging to the old shape unconsciously while trying to make a new shape. And Taylor Goldsmith, I think, really puts its finger, and I really encourage you to go back and listen to the song if you get a chance. It's called "When My Time Comes." But he puts his finger on exactly why this hurts so much, because making the new thing requires that we break the old thing. We can't have one without the other. His advice that continues to help in the lyric is the advice that refuses to pretend otherwise. Now, I want to be a bit careful here because this teaching has a shadow vision that I'm a little wary of. And the shadow vision is we just randomly, recklessly break things freely. We burn them down. The new is always better. Out with the old, in with the new. There's a sort of recklessness that we need to be careful about. But it's not what the lyric is saying, and it's not what the Dharma teaches. Letting go of something old is not the same thing as destroying it or breaking it or stomping all over it. Breaking something in the service of making something new is not the same as breaking something. Um, when we break it to create something new, there's a letting go. When we break it otherwise, just to stomp on it, it's just like a power thing, like a purging, like a cleansing. I just got to get this out of here. I can never reference it again. I can never think about it again or whatever. It's bad. That's not what we're talking about. You know, one is a loosening of the hand that we talk about, opening of the hand. The other is a fist that is tight but still calls itself freedom. And the lyric here, I think, is offering something more subtle. It's saying if we are honest about what we are making in the terms of the changes and the growth in our life, it actually cost us something. But we will be gentler with ourselves, and we will be gentler with everyone else who's doing the same thing. Because, for instance, everyone who's building a new marriage has broken an old one of being single. Has broken the old way of being single, assuming they haven't been married before. It doesn't mean that that was bad to be single. It doesn't mean they demonize it. And similarly, everyone who is sober has broken 1,000 small rituals of drinking, but they take that as a teacher. They take that history as something to value, not to stomp all over. Everyone who's become a parent has broken the person they were before the child was born. Everyone who has come to this practice, a practice like this one particularly, quietly, maybe without any grand fanfare, some earlier version of themselves has been let go that they did not need, or thought or knew they did not need. And this is not a tragedy, but it's not a triumph either. It is what, and I would call it bittersweet, because it's it's both at once. It's tragedy and triumph. The making and breaking are part of the same sides of the same coin. We inhale and we exhale. We open our hand, we close our hand. We close our hand, we open our hand, which is what a hand actually does when it is doing anything at all. I came to wait for the fire engine. Sorry. It's taken me almost a lifetime to really come to really satisfying close relationships in my life. I've said this before, I'll say it again, because it remains one of the facts of life that really surprised me. And I can tell you that becoming someone who has more intimate, honest friendships required the breaking of someone who had learned to believe very efficiently, very convincingly, that he did not need them. But that earlier self who thought he didn't need close friendships, that he could be self-sufficient, was not a bad person. He was a protected person. It was my ego. It was I couldn't step out of the role to really connect meaningfully with others. But it finally occurs to me I had to let go, because that existence was lonely. It was isolated. It was not fun. But it took me longer than I care to admit to wake up to that. It took this practice to wake up to that. Otherwise, I'm still just walking around in the dark, bouncing off walls. That old self had to be loosened piece by piece, that protect itself until something new could take shape where I had been standing for all those years. But nobody told me that. Nobody told me when I started this was what was happening. I thought I was just adding deeper friendships. I wasn't aware that I was having to break or let go of the protected, guarded friendship. It wasn't fully conscious. But I was breaking an entire architecture of self sufficiency as I perceived it, that I had mistaken for a personality, that I had mistaken for who I was. Let me say that again, because that's really the essence of this whole discussion today, that I was breaking an entire architecture of self-sufficiency that I had mistaken for years for a personality, for Jeff. And here's where the lyric from the song gets right, that I think most self-help books, most self-help undertakings get wrong. The breaking never stops. It's part of the growth. It's part of the path. It's not a phase we pass through on the way to some finished, complete self. We're never finished. We're finished when we're in the ground, because there is no finished self. as long as we are making anything new, writing a poem, pursuing a relationship, a new day this morning, a sentence I'm writing, a talk I'm writing, something else is getting loosened to make room for that new thing. But the practice is not, so the practice is not to stop breaking things we couldn't if we tried, but it's to notice what is being broken, to let it go, but not with harshness, not with aggression. And if we have to grieve it honestly when the grief is called for, but keep moving, keep making something new. And this especially applies to our inner world. This is where I think the Dharma, the teachings, and the lyrics of the song meet. The Buddhist insight, as you know, was not that we could avoid loss. It was that when we cling to the way the things were that we've lost, that when we refuse to let the old shape go, that's where most of the suffering lives. Not in the breaking itself, but when we argue with the breaking, when we fight with the breaking, or to put it another way, the weather changes and we stand outside in the field arguing with the wind. The weather changes and we're still arguing with the wind. It's change, it's impermanence, but there's a skillful process by which we can undertake this. So the invitation this morning I want to leave you with is that sometime today, just notice something you're making. It could be small. It doesn't have to be anything major. It could be a conversation you want to have differently with your friend. It could be a habit you're working on building. It could be a new version of yourself. We talk about setting intentions all the time that you're reaching towards. Notice what you are trying to make. And then, and this is the harder part because it's sneaky and it's subtle, see if you can notice what this is costing you. What are you breaking? What is being broken? What is being loosened? What is being set down so this new thing can emerge? Because too often we ignore that half of the equation, or we cling to that half of the equation and we continue to suffer. Don't rush past it today. Don't dress it up as some pure gain, but don't dress it up as pure loss either. It's not that black and white. Let it be what it is, that the making is also the breaking. And see if you can hold both just for a moment without collapsing into one or the other. Because you might find as I do more and more that noticing itself loosens something, and noticing both sides of the equation. The hand opens a little, maybe not all the way. The argument with the wind about the weather gets quieter. We pull our sleeves up, we keep walking. That's the most of it, honestly. Making and breaking, and then breaking and making. And somewhere in the middle of that, if we're fortunate and if we're paying attention, and if we're willing to be kind and gentle with ourselves and with each other, there's a different life, a different sense of where we are that emerges. So that's some talks this morning. Some thoughts this morning on the lyric from one of my favorite bands, and I encourage you to check them out. I have no financial interest in them. I just like them a lot, and making and breaking. So let's talk about it.